Welcome to Working Dogs and Whiskey. Join Sean White and Jonathan Moses as they pour a glass and dive into insightful and fun conversations about dogs in all their incredible roles. So grab your favorite drink and let's raise a glass to great stories, laughs, and a whole lot of dog talk.
All right, welcome back to another episode of Working Dogs and Whiskey. I'm Sean White, and I'm sitting here with my friend, co-host Jonathan Moses, and we have been away for a while, but for good reason. John, explain to us your background.
Oh, all right. Yeah, so, I forgot. This is the first episode with the new backgrounds. All right,
It
so
is on episode 25.
episode 25, baby. We've been putting in some work. We got some advice that our backgrounds need to upgrade, and they said the podcast is great. They enjoyed listening. Backgrounds needed some work, so me and Sean dug deep here because we're not the most like home style like decorating kind of guys. So we really reached deep here. Got the brick background, got some whiskey, got my little record player up here, some different books. I got like a history of whiskey book, psychology book, history of the German Shepherd. I think it's my Xbox, my German Shepherd picture. Interesting picture. That guy never did artwork and then got in a really bad accident, and then he woke up and could draw whatever he saw. So he drew a picture of my dog for me, and that's about it. Just a little bit of decorating. Got things looking a lot better, a little bit more appealing to look at, I hope. I can't help how I'm dressed, but, the background changed.
Yeah.
What you got going on, man? Go ahead and break yours down.
Mine's completely opposite of yours, because Lilia helped you decorate yours, right?
She did. So she picked, like, all the logo colors, like that little vase right there has, like, the amber, blue, black, and whites. Like, everything is based around the logo colors that's behind me. Her work, not mine. Again, it's not my area of expertise, but she made it work. The whole day of thrifting, going out, finding stuff that would bring everything together. It was like a pink Himalayan salt rock with the amber colors. That's a bookend, just out of frame. I'm sure she's gonna be like, "Hey, you need to rearrange things so they can see that." But she did good work. The picture frames. I've had this picture for 2 years now, and I've just had it in a book, like closed, as protected as I could keep it. And she's like, "Yeah, no, we're buying picture frames." So she did good. I'll show the pictures and the quotes and stuff I have up here later. But everything's based around like hobbies, and it all came together pretty nice.
No, it looks good, man. You can definitely tell that you had a woman's touch, which is nice because the aesthetics really complement each other, I guess would be the right terminology. And then mine, I could sum it up in like 30 seconds. I threw in a couple of awards that I've gotten over the years, some coins, and then on the other side, I've got an empty whiskey bottle right now, and then a picture of me and my first working dog, and then the Spartan helmet. It's a gift that I got from one of my mentors, and engraved in it is all the dogs that I trained at Lachlan the first time I was here. And then I've got the Working Dogs and Whiskey sign.
Yeah.
That's supposed to be illuminated, but I'm still working on the technical difficulties. But right now it's up. Yeah.
All right.
But
Dude, that sign turned out really nice.
Yeah, it's good in there.
Yeah. Once you figure out the remote and everything, I'm probably gonna cop one.
Yeah, no, it's fine. But yeah, we'll shout out the company once we get the remote going.
Yeah. Once we know the technology's doing what it's supposed to do, then they can get a shout out. Even though you saw the ad on Facebook today.
Yeah, that was wild. To see the logo out there and just scrolling through, and it's like, oh shit, that is us. Yeah. No, it's the little things that count that keep you motivated. But yeah, so we've been up to some updates and trying to make this a more official podcast, I guess. And
yeah.
But at the end of the day, we're just two guys here to talk about dogs and see what comes of it.
Yeah. We at least look like we know what we're doing now, so.
There you go. We want to look like we know what we're talking about. Yeah. No, it's good. All right, so we do have a topic for today, right?
Yep.
And what is that? Because I think we're going off of episode 23, right?
Yeah.
You had mentioned a topic. So what is it, sir?
All right. Topic of the day, we got emotion behind behavior. All right. So what that encompasses is how the dog feels about what we're telling them to do, not just the mechanics of what they're doing. Right. 'Cause I feel like as trainers, we get caught up a lot of times on the dog doing the thing without how do they feel about the thing.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the biggest part for me about it is, from what I understand, as far as emotions in general, like both human and dogs, is the first thing is that we can't definitively say, especially for a dog, that it feels a certain way about a certain thing, right? So the emotions we speculate off of observation of behavior. So i.e., the dog looks enthusiastic about what it's doing, being its tail's wagging, it's uh, inclined to do the behavior again, which is kind of indicative of some type of sign that it enjoys what's going on, or at least will do it again. But the flip side of that, and I always play devil's advocate with a lot of things, is that some of the indicators that suggest that the dog is quote unquote happy about it can also indicate stress as well. So, like, in the same tone, we could see a dog's tail wagging and we could say, oh, he's generally speaking, he must be happy, or we associate that with being happy. But then, in the same token, the dog could still wag its tail and be stressed, and it's actually a foreshadowing that the dog's about to bite or do something, aggressive. So, and that's where it's kind of hard to really say what emotional state the dog is truly in. We can only speculate as to what we think the dog would, how it feels. And we do that through observing behaviors and seeing uh, what persists or what continues, and then we kind of go from there. But the thing about it, I think this is more of what you were alluding to, is there are for sure signs that we can see where the dog is maybe a little bit worried about it, or being forced and compelled and things like that. There's a chronological order in which we can construct training where the dog will act appropriately, even when we're implementing aversives and things like that. It can be a lot more clear than vice not prepping the dog in some ways and getting a strong baseline. So, uh, and I'll give an example. Like for me, with the dog coming in, if I don't know it, I want to see what that dog is or who that dog is, just without any reinforcers, so to speak, no food, no nothing. I just want to observe the dog and get somewhat of a baseline. All right, this is who you are. Do you like to be around people? Are you standoffish? Do things in the environment kind of make you a little bit suspicious or cautious?
Yeah.
Things like that, and get a good baseline and try to, as much as I can with time constraints and everything, depending on what climate we're training in, get the dog comfortable with me as a person. And then from there, we'll see how it takes reinforcers that can kind of give me an indication of how the behaviors are going to be and things like that. And then as best as possible, we want to initiate those behaviors with positive reinforcement starting out. And then we layer in aversive controls that would suggest to the dog that it should still do those behaviors.
Yeah.
And that was a long-winded answer for no question at all. So what's your take on it?
All right. So I agree with what you were just saying, and well, you pretty much, I think you covered it. Like that was a pretty in-depth, thorough breakdown. But
Yeah.
the reason that I feel like it's important to talk about, again, is it's overlooked. Everybody worries about the mechanics. They don't necessarily think about why the dog's doing what it's doing. And I think you brought up a good point of when you're evaluating why the dog is doing what it's doing. So, like you said, you try and evaluate the dog out of drive. Who are you naturally, right? Like, what is your natural tendency towards this situation or this behavior, right? A lot of people don't do that. Like, they keep dogs in drive and they kind of put blinders on and go through some things without necessarily working through them, right? You can do that. You can accomplish the task just like we're talking about. I can get the behavior, or I can get the mechanics of the behavior down, but I'm not necessarily fixing the issue or creating what I want to see and how the dog feels about it. So if my dog maybe is, let's say, super reactive on leash, and I teach the dog to heel and ignore the dog, right? That's one way to deal with it. Or
Right.
am I going to go back and kind of get to the root of the issue? Why does my dog feel this way? How can I change how they feel about other dogs when they see them in the area? So that's kind of the difference in teaching the mechanics of a behavior versus actually fixing a behavior, going down to the root of the emotion and figuring out why they're doing what they're doing. And that's kind of how I look at it. It's just, I just see a lot of people, and I do it sometimes. Sometimes it's the only option we have, the only play we have, to the time constraints of the dog or the severity or sometimes the owner's commitment to what they're doing. Maybe the only option we have, we tell the dog to focus heel, and hey, you're just not allowed to look away, at least not for a while, right? And that's another way we can kind of build into fixing that problem. Maybe once you've learned to be calm and I can work you around those other dogs, then we can kind of get to the point where I say, okay, hey, now this is our end to kind of tapping into some of that emotion and fixing the root of the problem. So it can go about it both ways. The big goal is you have to go back and think about, why is this dog doing what it's doing? How does it feel? Why is it doing it?
Yeah. And one of the things that you touched on, I'm glad you brought it up, was like if we're talking about more of the extreme observations and behaviors, so reactivity would be a good one, right? That's an easy one to say, hey, he or she is not happy about what's going on here.
Yeah.
So, and that usually manifests itself in some type of and it could go both ways in some type of manner, whether we're talking aggressive tendencies, for lack of better words, or even the dog is cowering or in some capacity, right?
Yeah.
And reverting and being reluctant to do certain things, right? Those are all reactivities. It's a response to a certain stimulus that the dog is inherited in some capacity, whether it's through genetics, training, experiences, so forth and so forth, right? But one of the things that you brought up as far as like when we see those things is that the reactivity is just a reflection of the emotion, right?
Yes.
So when we look at that, that's not, we base a lot of behaviors and we try to and essentially address the symptom and not actually the cause, right? And so, and one of my friends, she said it best, is one of their philosophies in Jamaica is that prevention is better than cure, right? And I think that carries some weight with dog training. So, like an example for you, we have the prospect or the intern sitting in your lap, right? Your new puppy. And a lot of things we've already had probably an hour and a half conversation just in the 24 hours that you've had them. Seeking out prevention, right? It's essentially what you're looking at. Hey, is this normal? Is this, should he be feeling this way, reacting this way, and things like that. So when you start cutting back the layers and peeling back the layers rather, and looking at the root problem, is it really the dog or is it just an experience that the dog had with other dogs? Now we can look at some variable controls that we can implement and things and other ways to address issues, and kind of figure out a new pathway to get to the dog. And a lot of it, for the most part, again, circles around how do we create a better experience for the dog? Because some things are just, it's done, it's pretty solidified. Like now we're just trying to fabricate and polish it up and make it as best as possible, right? And we try to make the dog feel a little bit better if we can, or have a better response to the environment or whatever it is that causes reactivity or the undesirable, if you will. And primarily from my experience, and I'd love your take on this. Usually it starts out with some level of positive reinforcement, whether it's we scale it back and we say, hey, dude, you and I, we form a bond or rapport with the dog. And mainly, if I'm able to, especially in the working dog community, I feel like you can fix and resolve a lot of problems using play and then revisiting punishment on the back end. But a lot of it is based on what we reinforce, in those moments of uncertainty. And I don't want to make this another episode about reactivity, but that's just the subject that really sets the setting for this. When we have dogs that are reactive, the same way I would tell somebody, if we had appropriate punishers, punish before the big event so that we can decrease the amount of whatever punishment that we would have to implement. The same thing would go for play. I want to mark while the dog's doing something good so that it doesn't feel a need to react to its environment and things like that. And we can kind of push that threshold incrementally as we go along. But the beginning is maybe just coming out of the trailer or coming into an environment. We want to kind of get the dog in a playful, interactive mood or something of that nature, right? We want to make him a little bit more engaging and show him that he can be a little bit more confident in the environment, and we can kind of mask that in a way. But the biggest thing is to understand what it is that that's causing that emotion. Is it worried about what context? What is it that we can bring it down and say, hey, he's worried about the vehicle that rides by, or he's worried about sounds, or he's worried about gunfire. Okay, at what distance? All these considerations that have to be made. And I think a lot of things is in the rush of training and in the spirit of, seeking instant gratification along with resolution and time constraints, we look at the general problem, gunfire, dog reactivity. Ellie's just like that. And we kind of make some excuses for the dog in some ways, and we just kind of babysit it a little bit instead of looking at, all right, what really makes it, act this way. So I'm glad you brought up, looking at the actual root of the problem and understanding that emotion is the driving force for behavior.
Yes. All right. See, I like that. That's a good breakdown, man. I'm like, all right, you already hit on a couple of really good things. So a lot of times when we talk about emotion and how a dog feels about something, there's prerequisites I feel like we have to be able to start utilizing or counter conditioning some things, right? So we've got to have strong markers. So the dog has to want something from us. We have to build that desire to take something. Like, hey, if we're going to work on the reactivity, we'll keep running with that one, right? Reactive dog, I want to change how you feel about something. I need to pull you out of that scenario. I'm not going to do it with 1,000 dogs around and be like, hey, look, I could flood the dog, but that's not the moment where I say, hey, this is a very controlled, like you said, kind of changing one variable at a time. I'm going to build some kind of drive or motivation with whatever I have, food, toy, praise, whatever. And I want to make something very valuable to you. Once it's extremely valuable to you, then we can go back in and start to counter condition. You see a dog, you hear a dog, you smell a dog, whatever distance we need to get to, where I can reward and kind of work around that, right? I think that's a really good point. That's what a lot of counter conditioning looks like, or even if I was just teaching a behavior, again, I need my dog to want what I have. I need them very motivated. I need them to be excited about what I have. Because one of the things about emotion behind behavior that I love is when you have a dog that's motivated and wants something from you, they'll start to offer that behavior. They're working towards something. They are trying to make something happen. So it's a very operant dog, right?
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to sometimes when we use pressure or we make a dog do something they're not necessarily enthused about, we have to be consistent, right? I can't let up on when I use pressure. I have to reinforce what I say and what I do. And I can't kind of drop the ball on certain things because the dog's going to look for the times where I'm inconsistent. It's going to say, hey, is he going to make me do this behavior during this situation or that situation? Whether it's I tell a dog to lay down, right? Let's say I pressure a dog into a down a bunch and it's a dog who has reactivity issues or wants to get up, and we'll just say reactivity issues. Dog with bad reactivity issues, I taught the dog down through pressure and only with pressure, right? Which is fine. The thing is, if I'm not consistent with that pressure and moments where there's that reactivity is triggered, that dog is going to constantly try and break that down, right? Or he's going to get up, or he's going to try and see if I'm going to enforce it. Versus, let's say I had really high motivation, this dog excited, it wants something from me. Again, this is an ideal scenario, right? Like this dog wants what I have more than it wants to engage the other dog, or I just limit its ability to go engage the other dog. That dog's more likely to offer me the behavior that I want. It's more likely to choose the correct behavior instead of me making the choice for it. So when I have really strong feelings and emotion about something in a positive light, where the dog wants something from me, and I may have to limit its ability to go do something else or correct it for leaving that behavior. But for staying in the behavior, good things happen. So that dog will try and get to that behavior and make something happen, right? And the decision is left up to the dog. That's really the power behind it, in my opinion, because the dog is trying to get us to do something instead of us making the dog do something. Now, again, I'll correct you for leaving that behavior, but prompt me to go into it all day. That's what I'm here for. I want you to push that button, go into that down, and I want you to trigger me, not me have to force you into something. Again, sometimes I have to, but if I had to pick, I'd rather take the latter.
Yeah. One of the things that when you were talking about like using reinforcers and everything else with that, one, it reminded me of a dog that I saw recently. Well, recently is in a couple of months ago, but we were observing her, and so her learning capacity, we'll put it that way, had hit a peak. And like it was just a situation they couldn't get her to do certain behaviors, et cetera, et cetera. And so I started messing with the dog and kind of interacting with it and seeing, and this is over about a week span. And then I figure out that it wasn't so much that she wasn't willing to work for the reinforcer. It was the conflict of getting her to release the toy that was causing a lot of conflict in the teaching of the obedience, if that makes sense.
Yep.
So when we were talking, and I'm just circling back to what you said earlier about reinforcers, like when we're doing things with food, a lot of people love food because it's more of a transactional thing and it's easy to give to the dog, generally speaking. And it's less conflict. It's usually the big thing. And that drives a lot more clarity, and it keeps depending on what capacity you use it in, but it usually keeps the stimulus level on the dog's end very moderate and more conducive to learning. But then when we get in those situations, whether it's with agency, it's protocol, it's preference, it's whatever, but when we use more tangible items such as toys or those type of reward systems, well, the pro is that there's more longevity in the training, the dog doesn't get full, and if we use it in an idealistic capacity, the dog will sustain, its drive to want the reward. The con is we have to get the reward back, right?
Yeah.
So, and I say it's a con because it's something I see across the board and happens to me periodically, depending on the dog that I'm dealing with and stuff like that. But it's very, very easy to create conflict in just getting it back. And sometimes, most dogs, if they have enough drive, that's where you see a lot of trainers, they get away with, in my opinion, an absurd amount of punishment to get the reward back, but the dog still recovers pretty well because of the emotional correlation for the item itself, that it's willing to kind of look past the punishment that it just received.
Yep.
Which that's a whole nother tangent because that can lead into escalation and punishment. But we'll leave that alone, right? But usually it kind of supersedes, what happened. The dog's willing to be a participant in whatever the objective is in the session. However, there are those select dogs that want the reward, but then the conflict comes, and dogs, then it starts to bleed into the goal of the session. Well, now it's becoming a conditioned cycle of, all right, whenever I lay down or whenever I sit,
Yep.
Yes, I'll get the thing that I want, but then the battle comes right into it and it starts bleeding in. And so maybe we see sitting is not as quick, or they're not as excited, or they're a little bit more cautious about doing it. And we wonder why. And it's because there's conflict with the reward. So going back to that story, when we started, for time's sake, I did have to work some obedience into it, but our sessions it was very non-congruent. Like it wasn't a lot of obedience being done as much as capitalizing and reinforcing her letting go and getting that situated.
Yep.
What we saw from her was once she understood how to let go and saw a glimmer of hope, right? And I think that's something we can kind of more objectively speak on, rather, that we can install hope into a dog. So once she found hope that it's okay, I'll get it back, the obedience and the learning was a lot more conducive and just easier on the dog's end. You could actually physically observe her being less frantic and anxious going into a down or being called back into a heel and things like that. Like there's hope installed into the dog. So I think that's when we start talking about emotions and things like that, we have to be very careful. Like you said, we need markers. That's number one. We have to have a way to communicate. Then, secondly, if we're going to use tangible items or even food, the delivery and things like that, um, can also shift and push the needle in either direction as far as how they feel about doing the things that we're trying to get them to do. But
Yeah.
but yeah, what are your thoughts?
It's without trying to go too thick into the weeds, there's 1,000 different ways we could look at it. It's tough, man. Like the dog needs to feel good about what we're doing, and we try and maintain the purity of those behaviors. Like we don't want to see our dogs fall apart or start to crumple because now they dread what comes after the behavior, right? We want to try and separate those things. So again, like I want my dog to prompt me to go into the behavior, but then I only want to correct my dog for leaving that behavior. I want to try and make that as clear as possible, right? Okay, these are the guidelines, these are the rules. When you exit this behavior, that's when punishment comes in. That's where these things that you dislike, discomfort, all those things, that's where that comes from. Or that's where I want that to start. Try and keep that out of your behavior as much as possible. I'm guilty of it. Apex, Jesus Christ. His focus hill, no wonder he doesn't like to do it. It was taught with pressure and not the most fair pressure. Like it was
Right.
taught, hey, you look away for a split second, or I don't like some positioning, pop, 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 which can be done the right way. There's a way I just didn't know how to do it that way back then. So with his focus he'll do it, but he looks for every reason he can to break that behavior and go away from it and just go do his own thing. Whereas with Mona, my Mal puppy, damn, she's almost 2.
Yeah, it's
I
not a
guess,
little girl anymore.
yeah, I guess the puppy's in my lap now. But Mona, the almost 2-year-old dog, wow. With her heel, she sees that as a gateway to reward. So
Right.
she goes into the behavior. She'll come up and offer the behavior. If there's a ball out, a decoy present, or about to do something, she will come and flip into a heel position because in her mind, that's the best way to get to the reward. She feels good about it. She says, okay, I'm excited, and I know this is how I get there. This is one of the roads I can take to get what I want. Apex does not see it that way. He hates the heel. Like it's a fight to get him there because of how he feels about it. He
Mm.
says, hey, I got my ass whooped for being in here. Wasn't always sure what for. It tainted the behavior. He just doesn't enjoy it as much. He looks for a reason to leave, whereas Mona's trying to figure out, hey, is this a time I can go into it? Is this a time that I can go into this behavior? Because she believes it's going to get her what she wants and she enjoys it. And it's cool because when you get a dog, one thing I did do right with Apex much later in his life was the tunnel and the jump. That dog
Yeah.
loves those behaviors because of how it was taught. He will prompt me to do that all day long. It's probably one of the few behaviors I did teach him without pressure being implemented into it unfairly or too quickly, where he doesn't resent the behavior. Right. So those behaviors he wants to offer, he wants to go into them. And it's crazy because we did you know the story, but Apex is he's been built into a I will bite anything machine and nothing else matters. Like he was built into a monster from like 8 weeks old. Very little control. Like I would do obedience, but I never tied it into the bite work. So he doesn't have great secondary and do all these other things without being forced to do it. So after I taught the tunnel, one of the most impressive things to me, and it blew my mind, he would offer and go through the tunnel in the presence of a decoy because he enjoyed the behavior. He's like, hey, it's just much fun, and I know this also leads to reward. Right. And I didn't correct him for going with it. Like it was a fun behavior. He prompted me to do it. He felt good about it. Whereas again, my heel, I'm fighting to keep him in it. I was all right, embarrassing but fun story. So we did our first trial, or WT or WST. They went really smooth. On the last trial, I tried for something called a PD1, which if you look in the NWDA website and you look up PD1, the whole thing's pretty much made up. Like it just has to have a couple of things, but it's made up on the spot, right? So they were throwing sleeves on the field. The decoys can do whatever they want. I didn't know the routine. The judge is just calling out the entire thing as I'm on the field with my dog. I thought I had trained for everything because as long as he could see the decoy, he's like, okay, as long as I stay in this heel position, I'm good. I can see the decoy, I go get the bite. Well, never did I think the decoy would get up and run into the blind. And in that moment, it's then that I realized he'd never seen a decoy go into a blind without absolutely getting a bite. I said heel or foos 20, and that's just when the judge started counting. 23 times I told him foos, 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 foos to come back into the heel position. And again, he just wanted to leave the behavior and go get a bite. Now, there's some other things that factor there at play. He saw a decoy go into a blind. He'd never seen a decoy go into a blind and him not get a bite, right? So he's like, okay, got it. This is where I leave the behavior. This is my time to shine, right? He already doesn't like the heel. He doesn't want to stay in it because of how he feels about it. So he's looking for every reason, opportunity to leave. That was terrible. Like 23 times I had to tell and I'm stopping, I'm patting my leg, trying to get him to come back with me. It's a wonder we passed that obedience. When the judge started like going over like the end, they kind of read over like, hey, this is a really hard title. It's not something everybody can do. I was like, I fucking failed. I didn't even make it through obedience.
He's giving you all the excuses. He's
Yeah.
so white. Don't
He's
worry
like,
about it, dude. You fucking failed. But
yeah, he's like, this isn't easy. And I'm like, fuck. You needed a 70 to pass obedience, and I got a 71. So I was skating on thin ice. I ended up not getting the title anyway because he didn't out on the last out for the protection. But again, he didn't want to be in that behavior. He didn't even believe that behavior was the best way to get what he wanted. I have no doubt with Mona, I could go out right now, not practice with her for probably 2, 3, 4 months, and I wouldn't have to tell her to heel 23 times. Because she believes in the behavior, she feels excited to do it. She wants to be there. So she's going to stay in the behavior. And then again, with some other training, even with the decoy moving around, she sees as her best route to get to what she wants. Whereas with Apex, I punished him in the behavior a lot. I tainted that behavior. He wants to leave, and he's like, fuck it. Fuck this heel. He's in the blind. I want to go bite. I want to get out of here. Whereas she says, hey, I want to bite. I better keep healing, right? And she enjoys it.
yeah. I'm sorry. You keep talking about biting. I'm watching The Prospect. I'm like, he's about to bite your fingers.
Yeah, I got a shark in my lap.
Yeah. Oh. No, but no. So you mean more pressure didn't make him want to heal anymore?
I know it's a mind-boggling thing for a dog trainer to think about, but yeah, pressing him into the heel did not make him want to heal more. I don't know why. At some point, I think we all go through it, or at least I did. That's in our mind as humans. I think that makes sense. Like, oh, I'll correct him into it. He has to stay in it. He's not going to leave. That is not how dogs think.
No. And I think because I was trying to think of why, because I was thinking the same thing as you're telling this story, because I'm trying to backtrack to like where you were at in your in your dog training career or whatever, and it's kind of earlier on, and I'm thinking I would have done the same thing. I would have thought that more pressure, eventually he'll want to avoid it, but it doesn't match what you taught him in the beginning. Knowing Apex,
Yeah.
biting was imprinted into his head. That from how old was he? Like 6 weeks or something?
8 weeks old.
Yeah, he was already on a rag continuously on a regular schedule.
Yeah.
So it's imprinted in his head that biting is the thing, right? And then you tried to tell him to do a behavior that's one polar opposite of what he would want to do. And then saying you're going to compel him, it's just going to cause more resistance. But the other thing that I was thinking about while you were talking about that, I want to kind of talk about like caution versus fear, right? Because I think that's a very blurred line, and I think this kind of fits the mold for emotion. I don't want to. Let's change some of the setting. I guess we can use Apex if we're talking about bite work or whatever the case. But when we're using punishment, or we're going to use aversive control or things that the dog is not going to like, right? We want to use those things in a way where it will either understand how to get out of it, or it'll result in some type of desirable behavior. And so, and that's why I don't want to really tie it into reactivity, because that's like a last resort for me, is suppression, and there's ways to do it, but that's not the focal point of what, that's a whole separate subject. You can listen to episode 23 and we can hear us talk about that. But when we're talking about fear and caution, I think in most balanced training anyway, at some point the dog will be punished, like what you were saying, for electing to get out of behavior or for doing something else. And the way that we set that up and control the variables, we make it as appropriate as possible. So we try to work towards where we say, hey, more times than not, the dog understands to respond to whatever cue, down, sit, whatever command you want to put on it. And more times than not, it will do it. And then we kind of make learning a little bit harder for it. Or not learning, but, make it more challenging for the dog to execute those behaviors. So whether we're asking for duration, we're implementing distractors, all those good things to make it more challenging for the dog as we go along. Well, at some point when the dog elects not to, we're going to see a dip, so to speak, in emotion, because a punisher will be applied for not sustaining or not responding to the signal correctly. And when that happens, we're going to take a slight dip in emotion. That I think is next to unavoidable, or at least for my skill set in its current state. But we accept that and we understand that that's going to be the outcome. The thing that I measure it for myself is how long and what the response is afterwards. Lets me know how impactful my training was prior, how well my markers are conditioned, and things like that. Because while we can't avoid punishment, just like people can avoid it in life, we're all going to mess up. We're all going to play with something past its limits, and natural society or nature, something will take its course and kind of put us in the right direction, or try to. Man, that was good. Not what I just said. I'm talking about the dog almost bit you in the face. But getting back to the subject, we know that the dog's going to have to accept a correction at some point. The response afterwards is what I look for as a measurement tool to say, okay, the correction it's fulfilling its intended purpose. Because when I implement that, at that point, I do kind of want the dog to be a little bit cautious, and because caution, you're still assessing, you're still taking in information, in my opinion. Fear is like the extreme end of avoidance, where you're not taking in the appropriate cues, the appropriate information, the details. You're just strictly panicked and looking to only avoid, right? And you're not looking at what behaviors got you positively reinforced in the past. All that's out the window. It is now survival, right? And that's what I try to avoid. Have I been there with certain dogs? Yes, by mistake and trial and error, et cetera, et cetera. But I've learned a lot of how to avoid it, or to recognize the symptoms or the signs that this is on the horizon. So we need to dial back our criteria and things like that to kind of avoid that. But where we have a dog cautious, again, going back to the reactivity, that's the classic example. Sometimes, we can try to nurse it and construct it in this positive manner. And then after a while, it's just maybe the dog just is that it's so intrinsic to do that behavior that the only thing we can do to get its attention is to implement a punisher that will kind of get the dog to just be cautious and say, hey, dude, knock it off. That's not what we want anymore. And he's like, well, what do you want? How do I avoid
Glad
this?
you asked.
Now we're listening. And now I can, kind of redirect some of that energy into other things. And when I say other things, not necessarily more obedience, maybe it's more interaction, it's more play, it's more whatever, the dog needs at that given time, and what setting we're in, all these other external factors that play into it. But I think the biggest thing is understanding how to navigate caution and avoid putting the dog in a frantic or fearful state when we're doing those type of things.
So I will say, whenever You're trying to use caution to your advantage without dipping into fear or making the dog too anxious about it. Something I know me and you both do is after I start implementing corrections for exiting behavior, I'm rewarding way more frequently for going back into it. Like I'm going to significantly increase the reward. So let's say I tell my dog to lay down, right? He goes to stand up out the down. I correct him back into it. He goes with the pressure. He does a behavior. Maybe he's a little uneasy because that's his first correction to that degree or in that situation. Maybe I'm using actual correction instead of pressure because we can teach the dog to lay down using pressure, but maybe this time I pop the collar into a down, right?
Mhm.
So he's like, hey, I understand the signal and the direction you're giving me, but that felt a little different, right? But if he follows that pressure and maybe he doesn't complete the behavior, but he bends or he gives me something indicating that, hey, I understood what that meant. And you'll usually see it on the dog's face the first couple of corrections. They're like, whoa, that's different. Or, I'm not familiar with that. I'm going to reward heavy in that moment. You followed the pressure, you did the thing, you accepted the correction, and you went back into the behavior. Reward, reward, reward. Right. So that's where strong marker is going to come into play. Because now I can say, hey, I know that wasn't great. You went back into the behavior. I'm going to reward you for it. Right. And I feel like that's where you can kind of build a little bit of hope that they can work through those corrections, or it's not the end of the world. It just means, hey, don't do that. A lot of times I see people correct their dog in that moment and they say, hey, he broke that down. He's not getting anything. Right. And they
Yeah,
start
he
to
knew
hammer the
better.
dog. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. He could do better. I'm like, that's his first one. Like he's still trying to figure this out too, right? And I start hammering the dog loses motivation. It says, hey, all this correlates to me being in the down, right? Every time I'm in this down and anything happens around it, I start getting popped. The pressure starts to increase. This isn't fun. You're going to see a dog who doesn't really enjoy to lay down anymore. But if I've done my due diligence, I kind of proof that behavior. I've rewarded my dog. I've got strong markers. When I do go to correct that dog for exiting that down, if I'm increasing the reward and my dog's level of motivation is kind of being maintained to a certain minimum, then I can work them through that. I can make it very clear what they're being corrected for without them starting to just be fearful and overthink, okay, why is this happening? And they start to just say, okay, well, every time I'm in this down, this happens, fuck the down. Whenever I'm in the down, I still get rewarded. I still get praise for being in this down, but when I exit the down, the correction comes. And I can kind of clarify that a little bit, right? Instead of my dog just trying to figure out why is it getting hammered more and more and more after a week or 2 weeks of this fun luring and building it up, and all of a sudden corrections are coming with no reward after.
Yeah, how long do you continue that cycle? Because I know, like, the counter argument would be, okay, if you reward every time he gets corrected, could it fall into this behavioral chain of I'll accept the correction as part of the behavioral chain. If I become aroused, I get up, and then
Yeah.
it'll reward after. So, can you? What
It
about
depends
that?
on the dog.
All right.
Because there are certain dogs who'll pick up on that. They're out there. They're not as frequent as it doesn't happen that often. Some dogs will figure it out and they'll gladly stand up, get put back into it, and like you said, start the behavior chain over. At that point, I'm just tapping a negative punishment. I'm like,
There
okay,
you go.
now you get nothing. Like I'm taking the reward away. Forget the correction, and we're gonna go back to kind of the building blocks. So that's something I should be able to kind of take a step back and say, hey, remember when you break the down, I can also take this away from you, minus having to go straight to that pressure. And I'll kind of just balance those things out. So I'll use some negative punishment there because you will get dogs who will sit there and stand up on purpose, gladly accept that correction
Mhm.
because they know it starts the behavior over again and they're getting rewarded. And that one does, that was a learning thing, just going through enough dogs and seeing what that looked like and differentiating between a dog making a mistake and a dog who was being intentional in what they were doing. So that just took a while to kind of the spot.
Yeah, as you're slowly losing your fingers.
Yeah, so he's just over here munching on my hand.
Don't worry, we're about to wrap it up. But yeah, no, I like what you said as far as using the negative punishment. I kind of want to elaborate on that. Like in order to have negative punishment, there has to be an expectation for reward. And I think a lot of it when we're talking about emotions behind behavior and things like that is on both ends of the leash, right? So we've covered a lot of what the dog does, and I think for us as humans, we have to understand and I think we talk about it damn near every episode. But for me, like dog training it's becoming less objective oriented in the sense of we have to make behaviors happen, and I'm, blindsided to other things, and more of every moment, every interaction has to be more of an assessment. And when you start assessing things, I think that's when you start achieving better emotions with the dogs and better communication skills and things like that. So like when we're going back to using negative punishment, like I was saying, two things would have to happen at once. One, the dog has to have an expectation for reward in order for us to hold it as punishment, right?
Yep.
So the only way we get there is, like you said, we punish, we implement a correction to kind of keep the dog out of that fearful frame of mind. We reinforce and reward. And if we see and we look at things from an assessment point, and we start to see the behavior continue, and we're dipping into a behavioral chain, which means the dog is, again, like you said, accepting correction in order to achieve reward. Well, now I know you have a deep expectation for reward. Now I can withhold, right? That's an indicator I could just withhold, and that kind of alleviates me from implementing another correction, physical correction, potentially. Now, are there some dogs that are just dickheads and stubborn and things like that? Of course, those are what we would call the outliers. Those are dealt with on an individual case. And I'm not saying we kick the dog's ass, but I'm just saying, there may be a little bit more. Typically, those dogs can handle a lot more pressure than other dogs, right?
Yeah.
But again, everything is an assessment. That dog that, let's say that he is quote unquote stubborn or more resilient to a correction, again, I'm going to assess that and make a determination off of several trials, not just, a one and done or one day and just go back out the following day and say, all right, we need to really hammer.
Yeah.
The only way we hit those extremes for me personally is if we have a teeth on skin situation where the dog is actively coming up leash or it's about to harm somebody or potentially another dog. And in some cases, it's going to harm itself if we're talking about a dog that will chase cars and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then maybe we tap into single event learning and things like that. But on the broad scale of things, we want to sustain that emotion. We want the dog to have an expectation to go into behavior for reinforcement, and then all the other things applied. Duration is just, now we're just, for lack of better words, we're almost not climaxing, but we're in the, foreplay, if you will, of getting to that point, right? So duration is just looking as opportunity. If I tell it to do something else, opportunity, more opportunity, right? Into reinforcement as we build those blocks. But we start out, giving the dog hope, I think is really the narrative. Prescribing hope and then layering in aversives, but signals where the dog actually understands it as communication, not just, I feel discomfort. There's ways that we teach pressure, like for your instance with the down. I want to be able to use my leash in a way that when I pull down, the dog is compliant to the pressure. It understands that that is a signal to go down and a direction to go into it, right? And then so forth and so forth, whether we're healing, we're sitting, even in detection, the final response, we want to add duration to the response and things like that. We want to make the behavior itself intoxicating, and duration is just, okay, it's coming any moment. Now we're just hitting the lottery or the slot machine, right? We're just cycling and we're waiting for that big payout, essentially. Any closing remarks? Because I think Prospect is getting tired of us talking.
I think we talked about it pretty in depth. We could go on about it 1,000 different ways and how it applies in different behaviors. I'm sure we'll kind of tap into it again on another episode. But I think we wrapped it up pretty good on that one. Nothing's really coming to mind right off the bat.
Yeah, it's just weird because we tried, full disclosure, we tried to record this episode. We made it like 40 minutes through, and then now it's like, it's hard for me to explain because I feel like I'm repeating myself. And then I'm trying to remember stuff that I said before that I probably should have said. But no, I think we did overall. I think we did. We made our point.
Yeah, that's what we're doing it. And Knock on wood. Steady connection the whole time. No technical difficulties.
Yeah, that dude. Oh my gosh,
Well,
was
that
eating
felt
me
good.
up. Yeah.
Been a struggle.
Yep. It'll be worth the wait. It was worth the wait.
Yeah.
Because that last time we tried to record it, it crushed me.
Dude.
It's like 2 o'clock in the morning and it just cuts out. I'm just like,
Dude, it was rough. Right after we got the new setups done too.
yeah. But I didn't have the sign, so
I say it worked out though, because it was the sign came in, final touches are there. It'd have been nice to do it without this fucking dinosaur in my lap, but whatever.
it's all right. I think it adds value. That's cool.
May add value to the listeners, but my arms look like I just went through a damn chainsaw.
I'm sorry.
He will be quiet and crate trained. To be fair, this is his first 24 hours here, but
Yeah.
he will be quiet and crate trained for the next episode because this ain't gonna be a regular thing.
Yeah. All right. Let's wrap it up then. Yeah, so we can get that guy to sleep and we can get some sleep ourselves. All right. How do we find you on social media and all that good stuff?
Jonathan Moses, letter K, number 9 on everything.
And then I'm pretty much the same thing. Sean White, letter K, number 9 on Instagram, YouTube, and all that stuff. And then if you want to talk junk to both of us or have more recommendations for the podcast, you can talk to both John and I at the same time on Instagram on Working Dogs and Whiskey.
Got the Facebook group.
We do have the face. Thank you. Actually, that's a good point. I want to say thank you to a lot of people that have been sharing whatever information and just commenting and being involved in the Facebook group. It took us a while to get it going and getting it up and running, and now it's just good to see the conversations go back and people interacting. So thank you to everybody that comments.
We should clip this and put the clip in the Facebook group.
I'll leave that up to you.
I'll make the clip and then I'm going to put a question on the end of it and be like, what episode was this? To see who's
Good.
actually listening.
Yeah, we need to figure out who's listening because there's a lot of people in there. And
Yeah.
Not everybody's listening.
This is getting clipped in the Facebook group.
The setup, yeah. No, but no, really, we do appreciate the support. It pushes us to do more, and we're slowly getting some stuff online for merch, and so that we can support other people in the industry and things like that. But overall, we appreciate the support, and that'll do it for another episode of Working Dogs and Whiskey.
All right.
Free your mind.